It's freaking hot in Texas, and I just want to go and sit by the pool and read a book about mermaids. I didn't want anything serious, I just wanted something whimsical and fun, and I ended up finding through a random Goodreads search The Endless Blue Beneath by Shannon K. English. I've never read anything by this author, and I'd never heard of this book before, but I saw the cover and I was like, hey, mermaids. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And I got into it, and they were a little bit more nightmarish than I was expecting. My name is Sid, and welcome back to my chaotic and sometimes cluttered corner of the bookish internet. I have known that mermaid mythology is a lot darker than movies and books like The Little Mermaid would have led me to believe, but I've never encountered a darker mermaid story before. Half the time I look at covers and I pick up books based on vibes, not necessarily because I read the blurb. So that's why it kind of took me by surprise. But I do read horror and darker things, so that wasn't something that I was really mad at. I was just not really expecting it. And honestly, I did think that the darker themes were pretty interesting, and I really liked getting outside of my comfort zone with a different type of book than I normally read. So today I'm going to talk about The Endless Blue Beneath by Shannon K. English and give my thoughts. The main part of this review, I'm going to summarize the book, and that will be spoiler free, but towards the end I will have a clearly marked spoiler section so I can talk about the ending a little bit. This book came out on June 9th and is the first book in the Daughters of Atlantia duology. According to the author's website, book 2 is expected to be released in June 2027. So there's a little bit of a wait for the next book in the series. Goodreads describes this book as a hauntingly romantic queer fantasy, and it is the story of a girl named Epi who lives in a small coastal village, and she feels very ostracized because she misread a situation with her childhood best friend and kissed her, and the friend reacted very negatively, so she feels like she doesn't belong anywhere in this community except with her own family, whom she's really close to. Epi seeks some solitude on the local beaches just outside of her cottage after a very uncomfortable and cold encounter with her former friend. Instead of the solace that she's looking for, she encounters a mysterious young woman who is washed ashore in the shallows, and she immediately rushes to her aid because she thinks the young woman is very injured and possibly dying. However, when she rushes to help, Epi is kidnapped and dragged beneath the waves by a colony of mermaids. These mermaids are definitely not Disney mermaids. There's nothing friendly or happy about them, really. They are the mermaids of myth and legend. The mermaid that takes Epi away is described as having a giant smile filled with shark-like teeth, and Epi finds that they devour human flesh. Epi spends the first several chapters of the book convinced that the mermaids are just keeping her alive to later eat her, and she's pretty freaked out by this. Understandably. I did think that this was a really cool element of this book. A lot of times I do read really fluffy romantic mermaid books, and they're not like this at all. So having this like horror element to the mermaids was just really cool. These mermaids are completely alien and foreign to anything Epi has ever known, and as they should be, because they are creatures that she has never seen, and they're a whole separate species from humans. The mermaids that take Epi live in large colonies, similar to beehives or ant mounds. They have a single matriarch per colony, and this matriarch is responsible for spawning ocean-born mermaids or transforming land girls into land mermaids. And they've chosen Epi for this latter process. So They bring her before the matriarch, and a seed is implanted in the back of her neck. And this starts a very horrific body horror scene of transformation where her body rips apart and she grows a tail and gills, and she no longer has the ability to live on land like she had been all of her life. And Epi is scared and anguished over this change. She is adamant does not want this. She doesn't want them to change her. She just wants to go home to her family and to her younger brother. But the matriarch uses a lot of mind control and manipulation to force her submission. Through their bond with the mother, all of the mermaids in the colony have a mind speaking connection, and they all can hear each other's thoughts and inner monologues. Suddenly, after her transformation, Epi can hear the thoughts and conversations of everyone in her colony, and it's quite overwhelming. At this point in the book, Epi spends several mermaid weeks or months in this kind of dreamlike state of how much she loves everyone and loves the life, with this little niggling thought in the back of her head about how much she kind of misses her family. And she worries about her younger brother Theo and how he's getting on without her, and whether the family is functioning all right with her being gone. Eventually, the matriarch decides that she wants to loosen the control she has over Epi, and she believes that if Epi understands mermaid culture and history, she will willingly embrace the new life she's found herself in. The mother eventually allows Epi to explore the wider mermaid world and travel outside the bounds of the colony, where she learns about the history of their world and encounters a group of humans that are actively hunting the mermaids and seeking out their colonies to destroy them. Epi also struggles with the realization that the mermaids' main source of food is actually humans, and she discovers this when they come across a shipwreck and her sisters are feasting on drowning sailors. Epi is already struggling to adapt to her new surroundings, and she absolutely cannot get around consuming human flesh the way her sisters do. It's during this journey that Epi meets Marie, who is completely alone and isolated herself from other mermaids. Marie tells Epi that her colony had been destroyed by the mermaid hunters, and her seed that allows her the mental communication was ripped out during this attack, so she can no longer communicate with anyone via the mind bond that they have. Like Epi, Marie also has a difficult time consuming humans, even though this mermaid witnessed the horrific slaughter of her colony at the hands of the mermaid hunters. This book felt like a pretty odd mix of genres to me. The story spans a surprisingly long amount of time, but Epi's perspective remains pretty unchanged from where she was at the beginning of the book, and it's very youthful. Even though it's an adult novel, Epi's voice and reactions and emotions often felt much younger to me than her stated age of 24. And it's especially apparent once Marie enters the picture. That youthful perspective sits alongside scenes of intense body horror and graphic violence, which created an interesting but sometimes really jarring tonal mix-up. And just as a quick content warning, if you are thinking about picking this one up, the violence isn't limited to just humans or mermaids. There are some small animals that get harmed along the way too. What I love most about this book are all of the underwater settings. The author did this amazing job of describing all of the unique variances of the different colonies that Epi visits with Marie. They visit a tropical colony off the coast of Brazil, and the descriptions of the water and the rainforest that they're interacting with are just vibrant and beautiful, and it really set the stage for all of the activities and actions that happened. It was just very descriptive and beautiful, but ironically, that ended up becoming one of my biggest issues with the book as a whole, because the world building is beautiful and lush, but we spend so much time soaking in the atmospheres and having characters just have conversations and not much happens through a large amount of the book, that the pacing just starts to drag. It just felt like we were spending pages of admiring scenery without the story really moving forward in a meaningful fashion. I honestly found myself just setting the book down and going off to do some laundry or take the dogs for a walk and then just not coming back to it. I would either find a different book or just not read anymore at all. And then the romance of this book just did not work for me. All of a sudden, Eppie's love interest, Marie, is just there. And suddenly, Eppie is completely infatuated with her. Eppie does not ever want to be parted from Marie's side. But I kept questioning why. Is it just because Marie is beautiful and she's the first girl that Eppie can really be close to without any kind of repercussion? There was no build-up. There's just not a lot of establishing Marie, or even Eppie that matter, as characters. We're told that they spend weeks talking and growing in their relationship, but none of that relationship development happens on page. By the time Eppie is deeply in love, I still felt like I barely knew who Marie was. And I think part of why the romance didn't land for me is because Eppie always felt so much younger emotionally. Her feelings for Marie felt immediate and all-consuming in the way that reminded me more of a teenage crush than an adult relationship. And by the end of this book, I just was not really convinced that this was an actual romance. It felt more like an atmospheric fantasy horror with a few romantic elements, but I wouldn't classify this as this beautiful love story. The relationship between Eppie and Marie develops very quickly, and when the story finally does put this relationship under some real pressure, I didn't find Eppie's emotional response to any of it very believable. Overall, I rated this book 3 stars, and I will put a list of my overall ratings here. The atmosphere and the world building were top notch, and they were so beautiful, but the plot and the characters just left me wanting so much more from this story. And now, there are spoilers ahead. So if you haven't read this book yet and you're really wanting to dive in, this is your 5-second warning to go ahead and cover your ears or be eaten by a shark. Still here? Okay. So here's where the romance really lost me. Around the 70% mark of the book, Eppie discovers that Marie has been sneaking off from her while she sleeps, and she has been secretly meeting with the mermaid hunters to let them know where various colonies are located. These are the same hunters that have been responsible for destroying colony after colony throughout the book. Marie reveals to Eppie that after her own colony was destroyed, she was taken captive by these hunters and raised by them as a spy, and she genuinely believes at this point that she's carrying out God's will by helping them eliminate mermaids, despite being one herself. I actually thought this was a really interesting twist. It explains so much about Marie's character, and it finally gave her some depth. But the problem is what happens next. Eppie ends up aboard the hunter's ship. She reunites with her brother, who is by this point an old man, and helps participate in a final battle that eliminates the hunter threat once and for all and saves the mermaid world. But once everything is over, Eppie is just basically ready to move on with Marie. Marie has just admitted to playing a major role in destroying countless mermaid colonies. She admits that she has lied to Eppie from the start of their relationship, and she's played a major role in the deaths of mermaids that Eppie has personally known and cared deeply for. And yet, Eppie's forgiveness feels almost immediate. Instead of returning home with her sisters that have come to participate in this final battle, Eppie chooses to stay in solitude with Marie. I understand that Marie herself is a victim in many ways. She was manipulated, indoctrinated, and spent years believing that she was doing the right thing. That's such an interesting conflict, and one that I wish that had been explored so much more than just having it dumped at us at the very end of the book. But despite all of that, I still don't think that she earned Eppie's response in any way. I wanted to see some emotion from Eppie, some anger or some grief. I wanted Eppie to wrestle with loving someone who had done something so devastating, but instead the story just skipped right over all of that and went straight into the forgiveness, and emotionally I just couldn't make that leap with her. And it wasn't just the romance that left me feeling this way. Eppie's brother Theo's ending left me with a very similar feeling. Theo is lost when the hunter's ship goes down, and I thought Eppie's reaction here also didn't quite fit everything the book had just spent hundreds of pages establishing. For most of the novel, Eppie is constantly thinking about how she can get back to her mother and her brother. She thinks about them constantly. She wonders if they're okay. And at one point, she even defies the matriarch and flees the colony to get back to the beach where their cottage was and see if she can see Theo and make sure he's okay. So when Theo dies, I expected this loss to completely devastate her, and she is grieving for maybe an hour or two, and then the story just seems ready to move on. She and Marie bury Theo's body and they just swim away together. And once again, I felt like the emotional fallout was resolved so much faster than it had been earned here. Now, I do understand this is the first book in a duology, so there is a second book planned, and it's entirely possible that all of these emotional consequences and themes are going to be explored in that book. But for me, this book felt like such a standalone that I expected more from these characters throughout the book. I almost think that a stronger ending would have been a heartbreaking cliffhanger. As much as I hate cliffhangers and unresolved romances, I think ending with Eppie and Marie separating and forcing them to come to terms with everything that just happened would have felt more emotionally satisfying than the seemingly happily ever after that we got. Because as it stands, I finished this book feeling like the world was fascinating, but the characters never quite convinced me to follow them on to a second installment. So that's where I landed with The Endless Blue Beneath. I absolutely love the world Shannon K. English created here. The underwater colonies, the mermaid mythology, and the body horror were all incredibly memorable, and I'll probably be thinking about all of those elements for a long time. I just wish I'd connected with the characters as much as I connected with the setting, because if I had, I think this would have 100% been a 5-star read for me instead of a 3-star. But if you've read this book, let me know in the comments what your take was, and if you have any creepy mermaid recommendations, I'd love to hear them.